All right, we're here with Nick Delgadillo. We're bringing him back on the show. Nick just announced an event. So, Lift, Shoot, Fight on April 30th to May 1st, 2022. It'll be the first event of its kind. It'll be at the Wichita Falls Athletic Club in Wichita Falls, Texas. Since Nick is putting this on and it's a bit of an experiment, I thought we would talk to Nick today about self defense. Um, I did one of these weekends with Nick in North Carolina last year, and it was awesome. So if you're into self-defense, if you're interested in getting into self-defense, you might enjoy this episode. um, Nick, I thought we would start by talking about your recommendation to somebody who has no experience with self-defense and is interested in getting started. So what do you recommend? Do they get strong first? Do they learn jiu-jitsu first? Do they learn to shoot first? Obviously it's situational, but what general advice do you have?
Man, it's a pretty loaded question. Um, the thing is, let me answer it like this. So you have to be strong no matter what, right? So whether you're interested in self defense or not, strength training needs to just be part of your existence, um, physical existence. So that should always just be a default assumption that you're going to be doing some strength training of some kind, preferably barbell based strength training on a smart, intelligent, logical progression, like we advocate. But that's just going to be part of the deal. So, and for a few reasons, primarily, in terms of just physical performance, it affects all the performance characteristics, just like we always talk about. But in terms of self defense and fighting and hitting somebody and grappling with somebody, if you are stronger, you're more capable, you're harder to deal with, you are just by default more robust, able to handle things better. So, you know, bones, muscles, all the stuff that is involved in movement and fighting, all is improved with strength training. So let's take the strength training part kind of out of it, because we just need to assume that you're going to be doing that. If you're not doing that and you're relying only on skill, whatever that may be, striking skill, grappling skill, you are leaving a huge gaping hole in your capabilities. If you take two guys who are of equal skill, and these kind of things are always like hypothetical and theoretical and shit. But you take two guys who are about of equal skill, the stronger guy is going to be better. And it's hard to argue with that, right? If you are actually involved in training with people and fighting people, you know how much harder it is to deal with a new person who is really just brutally strong, whether they were a power lifter or worked on a farm or whatever their whole life. Those guys are just going to be really hard to deal with. And the typical recommendation is to, well, don't use your strength, right? Because uh, you're not learning any skill. Now, there's some truth to that, but if strength didn't matter, why would you have to tell somebody that, right? So, anyway, so let's just say you're going to be strength training because you have to be strength training. Strength and conditioning are part of this whole deal. So, strength forms the base of that performance pyramid. Like if you think of your base capabilities all the way up to the very specific skills that you're going to need and whatever it is that you do, strength is always going to form the base of it, unless you're doing ultra endurance stuff. Um,
Mhm.
so strength is a deal. So you got to be training, right? We agree there, right, Ray?
100%. And I think there's another aspect of being big and strong that I can relate to that you can't, because you've been a big guy your whole life, and I used to be
Right,
a small guy. And
right.
when it comes to self-defense, my point of view is the best thing you could do is avoid the situation in the first place. Um, so if you're 6'2" and 170 like I was, uh, and there's a bunch of drunk assholes around trying to prove a point or be tough guys, I'm an easy target. And I've had a lot of those experiences throughout my life. People wanted to prove a point on the tall, skinny guy, um, which prompted
Yep.
me to get big and strong and learn how to fight, actually. But interestingly enough, since I've been 240 plus, not only have I had nobody attempt to pick a fight with me, I haven't even had anyone shoot the aggressive eyes my way. So, uh, I,
Isn't that crazy?
yeah, it's fighting is primal. It's your id. It's the animal stuff. Other mammals understand size, and when you look at another person, you without thinking, whether or not that risk is worth taking. So
Absolutely.
being big and strong not only is effective and useful if you're going to try to defend yourself, but it will also get you out of a bunch of situations before they even start. If you're the big, confident, friendly, strong guy, your chances of getting mixed up in some nonsense that you didn't start are much lower. And I can tell you that from personal experience.
Yeah, physical size implies capability, and that's not true. In a lot of instances, that's not actually true. So when you look at somebody, you're automatically going to size them up on some level, and just being physically imposing uh, plays a huge part in that calculation, right? And it doesn't just apply to fighting somebody. It's just actually in your interaction with people, you treat people who are small differently than people who are big and imposing. That's just the way we are, right? But absolutely, people don't generally people generally avoid me. Like the only time people haven't avoided me is over the last 2 years. Because they want me to put a mask on or something. But other than that, my interactions with people in the world are extremely limited. People avoid me, and for whatever reasons, right? I'm brown and I'm big, and they may be a little bit intimidating looking. So anyway, yeah, being big, being strong, all those things factor in. But just in terms of outside of the posturing and the mental side of things, in terms of the physical capability, being strong is absolutely critical. Being strong lets you be better conditioned. Being strong helps you to apply skill better. Yes, you can be sloppier if you're stronger. You have to be more technical. You have to be more proficient if you're smaller and not as strong. But that does not, uh, in my opinion, mean that you should hold back your strength training. You should be doing it because and at the same time, strength training takes a long time to acquire. It improves all your physical characteristics, so why not work on it at the same
Yep.
time?
One point to add
So
on
yeah,
that,
be
Nick.
big.
So
Go ahead.
when it comes to getting bigger and stronger, and that being a deterrent for other people to mess with you, I've definitely seen it go too far. I've seen big, strong guys
Yes,
who have no idea how to fight get this
right,
extreme level of confidence and want to puff out their chest at every opportunity. And that is so unbelievably dangerous because people
right,
that know how to fight, people that have been in fights, um, know that you don't want to volunteer yourself for that situation
right,
unless you're mentally unstable or drunk. That's not a
right.
sane, rational thing to do. Um, and I know a few people that definitely their ego is ahead of their skill set.
Yep,
And if something happened and they were attacked, the overwhelming feeling of emotion that takes place during that moment and your ability to react in a way that's effective, um, the emotion ramps up and your ability to react goes to zero. And it's embarrassing. I've seen big guys really embarrass themselves. And that's
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 right.
the least of your concerns if you're in a situation like that. So the
Right.
point here is just like Nick said, you have to be strong, spend your time getting stronger. That is the baseline for all physical endeavors. Um, just be very careful not to let that go to your head. And just because when you walk into a room, people can feel your presence and you notice, make sure that doesn't give you the idea that you somehow are physically capable when you're not. So try to be very self-aware about your capability.
Well, yeah, you've got to layer the skill on top of that, right? Because the strength without anything else doesn't matter. It's just like it's the same thing as owning a gun and not being able to use it, right? The vast majority of the 400 million people who own guns in the United States probably have no idea how to actually use those under stress in a fight under attack, right?
Yep.
So it's the same thing, right? You got a bunch of strength, but you've never actually trained at all. You've never been in a fight. You don't know what's going to happen until it happens. So yeah, you've got to layer the skill on top of that. Absolutely, no question.
All right. So let's
So yeah, I
say.
hope nobody's taking.
Oh no, go ahead.
I hope nobody's. Yeah, I hope nobody's taking the idea that you should just be big and strong as like good enough because it's not. Right. This is in support of the skill that you're going to learn.
Right. It's the baseline.
Um,
Yep.
Yeah.
So Nick, someone listening, let's say they've been through the novice linear progression, they've gained some size and strength. Cool. The baseline's there. Where do they get started in self-defense? What's a good place to start?
Um, it, it depends on what you have access to. So um, my, I wouldn't say my background, because I started in Muay Thai way back, and then got into submission grappling. The guy I was training with was at the time what they called an NHB, right, cage fighter, which is, we all know, is MMA now. So we did submission grappling too, and we did a lot of security work and a lot of um, like supplemental security work and stuff like that. So I was kind of lucky to be involved in all that kind of stuff early on. But some years passed, and then I got into Krav Maga, which was very popular. It was kind of new in the early 2000s, and it made a lot of sense at the time, and it still does make a lot of sense in terms of the principles, right? So it's about trying to be efficient. It's about reacting to an attack violently and with as as few tools as necessary, and then ending an encounter quickly, right? So all that stuff makes really good sense. Um, and when you take those principles and you apply them correctly, it's exactly the way that self defense should be done. The problem is that it got very popular very quick, and uh, things got um, things got institutionalized in the like in the curriculums and the way people are teaching things, and things split up, and then things started to get kind of silly, and then you ended up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Krav Maga instructors that are essentially teaching fitness classes, right?
Yep.
Um, and what I mean by that is, if you're teaching self defense, you should be putting on a helmet and some gloves and getting some weapons out and testing to see if what you're doing actually works. And most guys don't do that.
Yep.
Most Krav Maga guys don't do that, and most self defense instructors don't do that. So anyway,
Let me pause you there for a tip. That this is worth stating explicitly. If you decide to train martial arts and your martial art does not include sparring against an opponent that is attempting to resist, so real life, actual simulation, not choreography, um, don't expect it to work on the street or in the ring.
yeah, or even just pressure testing of some kind, right? Just learning a technique and then pressure testing even a little bit. There's ways to do that with normal people who aren't interested in beating the hell out of each other. There's ways to do that with your accountants and your nurses and your house moms, and 50-year-old out of shape dudes. There's ways to teach them skills and then pressure test them at a level that they can succeed or not succeed depending on the situation, but they won't beat the hell out of them and won't make them want to never do it again.
Yep.
So there's ways to do that, but it's just like what we deal with strength training, right? That's kind of the next level of coaching that is required, which most instructors in the world don't possess that skill. They just teach what they teach, and they don't really know how to go beyond that, right? So anyway, like our pressure testing initially was just sparring. We still sparred. We rolled multiple times a week among the instructors and kind of the advanced students, and we sparred at least an hour every day that we had classes. So we were still fighting and doing that kind of stuff, and that bled over into the way we taught Krav Maga, and then eventually we just kind of I just kind of dropped the curriculum stuff and used the stuff that seemed to work well, and then just disregarded a lot of the bullshit that was involved. Um, so anyway, the answer is most people think of something like Krav Maga self defense, and it's just like anything now, right? It's just like let's use CrossFit as an example, right? So when you think about CrossFit, you may be looking for a very specific thing, and there's really really good people, good coaches out there doing CrossFit, and there's a whole bunch of them that are terrible and not very good at all. So it's the same situation. There are a few people using the name Krav Maga associated with what they teach, and they're very very good, but they are very few and far between.
Yep.
So
Which is a
But
good
you and I
lesson
went
for
out.
us, by the way, Nick, because we have to be careful to never become CrossFit or Krav Maga, right? So
Sure, of
grow more
course.
slowly and make sure the quality standard doesn't drop.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, you and I went out to Fit to Fight last March, and they still mostly call what they do Krav Maga, and that's nothing like what you thought Krav Maga was, right? Because you've at least seen it, and it's pretty fucking silly, and that's not what we did there, right?
Well, my impression of Krav Maga was not good because we'd have guys that were into Krav come over to Ruka, the BJ Penn training center in Costa Mesa, California, where we used to train Muay Thai, and they'd want to
And they
spar
thought
with
they could
us.
fight.
They'd want to spar
Yeah,
with
they
us.
thought they could fight.
You know, it was
Right.
because no one's going light on them. They want to spar. We're going to spar, and
Right.
their confidence was way too high. Their skill was way too low.
Right.
And there are so many goofballs in the Krav world that the the brand name has been tarnished. So yeah, I had a
Right.
pretty low view of Krav when you told me you were into it. I was kind of surprised and wondered, and then when I met your buddy North Carolina, I was like, okay, these guys are legitimate. And speaking of which, do you want to plug them real quick in case anyone's in that part of the country and want to check those guys out?
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say. Well, they've got affiliates all over the place, so it's Fit to Fight, and Ryan Hoover's the head guy there. If I was going to send somebody to a Krav Maga place, a lot of them still call themselves Krav Maga. If they're a Fit to Fight affiliate, I think they're good to go. So go train there. Otherwise, proceed with caution.
Yep.
Because I don't know. There's just I've been involved with that stuff for a long time, and most of it is pretty terrible.
Yep.
It's just like you said, and I would go to instructor trainings. The main center was in LA, and I went out there a handful of times, and you're supposed to spar, and you can just tell that most of these guys spend zero time actually hitting each other.
Yep.
But anyway, so Krav Maga, the self defense, the combatives guys, they're all they're hard to find. There's a few people that I would recommend, but unless you're nearby, unless one of them is close to you, it's not likely that you're going to get decent training. The good thing is that like good combatives and self defense training is seeming to get more and more popular, and I think it's a result of BJJ being so popular now.
Yep.
People are like, well, how do I incorporate my gun or the things that I carry around into my grappling? So then it kind of naturally flows into this, wrestling and grappling and integrating your weapons into what you do. So anyway, Fit to Fight guys are great. Anything Shiv works, Craig Douglas is amazing. The guy's awesome, teaches fantastic courses. And, kind of one of the originators of this integrated fighting stuff, weapons and close contact and all that. So there's a handful of guys that do his stuff. There's a guy in Boise, Paul Sharp, who is one of the OG kind of Shivworks guys, and he's up there. So there's a handful of those people around. Again, if you can find them, go train with them. But for most people, most places, folks, something where you are going to go against the resisting opponent from day one. All right, so let me start there.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is that you've got to be, whatever it is that you're learning. If you are going against pads or somebody who's 100% compliant, or you're doing like choreography or like learning dueling, which is essentially what a lot of like martial arts is, it's not real fighting, right? Because there's an element of uncertainty of what the other person is going to do, and you having to respond to that or be ahead of that, or at a higher level of proficiency, you creating opportunities for yourself. Like if you want a guy to come to you, you push him away so that he comes towards you, right? And that sounds like kind of kung fu bullshit, but this is what grappling is, right? It's just kind of like a give and take, pushes and pulls and stuff like that. So and it's the same thing with striking. The problem with striking, like, if you could go box for 10 years, you can fight, right? But it takes a very long time to get proficient at striking, in terms of timing, movement, all putting together combinations. You can learn how to throw a punch in like 30 seconds. But actually hitting another human being who doesn't want to be hit, especially if they're any good, is a much harder thing. And the other problem is that how do you train against a resisting opponent in a striking um, art without beating the hell out of yourself,
You
right?
can't.
You can't until you get good,
Right.
right? I mean, you could just throw people in and start blasting each other, but there's going to be broken noses, there's going to be concussions, there's going to be, it's unsustainable at an early level. Like you can't bring in a brand new person, teach them how to throw a jab, and then say, all right, fight, right? Because it's not gonna go well.
Right.
Now that's not to say that there's no value in that. My point is that with something like wrestling or jujitsu, you're not going to find wrestling available for adults in a lot of places, but you can find jujitsu everywhere.
Yep.
We're in a town of 6,000 people here. There's a jujitsu club here, so there's jujitsu everywhere. You can go do it, and one of the great things about jujitsu, probably the best thing about jujitsu in terms of self-defense, is that pretty much from the first day, first week, first month, whatever, but very early on, you're going to learn a technique and you're going to have to try to apply it to people who don't want it done to them, right? So there you go, right? You have fully resisting opponents from day one, and on top of that, you're getting all of the feel of leverage, pushing and pulling. Also, the very close contact, right? Because fights in real life, attacks in real life don't happen outside of arm's length.
Yep.
They're like right here, right? It's in a very, very close, very uncomfortable clinch type of a situation. So you get very comfortable being in those weird, uncomfortable, unfamiliar positions.
Yep.
So there we go. That was a really long answer for saying do jujitsu, unless you can find a very good Krav Maga instructor or a very good combatives program. If you're looking at Krav Maga, a couple things that you can do is like if there's a few times that I've moved around and I've looked for a Krav Maga school. So the first thing I'm looking for is, do they have a jiu-jitsu program and do they have a sparring program? If they have a program where they regularly are sparring and they're regularly doing jiu-jitsu, like they actually have it, like maybe the Krav Maga instructor is a jiu-jitsu purple belt or a brown belt or something, you're probably good to go. If it's just Krav Maga and Taekwondo, for example, or just Krav Maga, and you see like on their website that there's nobody doing any jiu-jitsu, nobody competing in jiu-jitsu, nobody sparring, avoid it. It's probably not any good.
Yep. I think that's a great answer. I think going to a place that does the integrated stuff makes a lot of sense, especially after the experience that I had with you. And in the absence of that, jujitsu being top of your list is the way to go. What I like about jujitsu especially is, back to your point about learning how to strike. You can learn how to strike, and you can still get knocked out with a lucky punch. It's
Yep.
it's kinetic warfare. It's chaos. The beautiful thing about jujitsu is that you're out of range, and then you're face to face, right? So you're not spending any time in the person's striking range. The point is to close the distance, neutralize the threat, and then take the fight to the ground where you have the advantage. The other thing I like about jujitsu is that you could train for 6 months, let's say, 3-4 days a week, and be proficient, significantly more proficient than someone that's never done grappling. Meaning, if some knucklehead is picking on you or causing a problem, and you do have to defend yourself, 6 months of boxing, maybe, but 6 months of jujitsu, you've got a decent chance. White belts in jujitsu can be nasty. Becoming a purple belt like Nick and spending a whole bunch of time and years investing in becoming more proficient, of course, has a lot of value, because then your just level of control and your capability goes up significantly. But the amount of things you learn as a novice in jujitsu are instantly applicable and are super valuable. So, and there's fantastic jujitsu instruction all over the country. So as Nick said, he's in Iowa Park, Texas, and you've got a brown belt at your school. You're a purple
Black belt.
You've got a black belt now. Nice. Did he get his black belt?
Yeah, about 3 months ago.
Awesome. So you can go all over the country and get fantastic jujitsu instruction. So I definitely recommend doing that. And then Nick, what would you recommend to somebody who, let's just say for whatever reason, doesn't want to do jiu-jitsu, they've got a limitation, or just in general would prefer to learn how to strike? What advice do you have for someone that's trying to find a place to learn striking?
Yeah, let me back up a little bit to a couple things you said. Just some clarifications. Listening to this who are like screaming at their computer right now. So, um, first thing was, um, uh, yeah, the most, and this is actually to reinforce your point. The most dangerous guy in the room in a jujitsu school is the white belt who's been there for 8 months. Um, and what I mean by that, not in terms of like dangerous to like the brown belts and the black belts in the room. I mean like the likelihood that he could get a submission, or he could accidentally elbow you in the face, or knock a tooth out, or like seriously crank on an elbow or a shoulder or a knee or something is very very real,
Or a
because
neck?
they're just or a neck, yeah, or they're just at that point where that proficiency is starting to get there and the comfort is starting to get there, but the control isn't quite there yet. But you take that guy outside of the jiu-jitsu school, and you know, you could say that guy could fight, right? He could probably handle himself. Where like you said, that necessarily might not be the case with a guy who's just doing boxing or Thai boxing or something. The second thing is, and this is kind of important. So because I didn't mention it, but I don't. I recommend jujitsu, and there's some holes though in jujitsu, right? There's some big holes in terms of self defense. One of them being that you generally aren't going to have the focus on self defense in terms of like how do you deal with a punch, how do you deal with somebody trying to kick you. Now, some of this stuff is inherent in just the way you train jujitsu, right? If you're comfortable closing distance, you can deal with punches, and it's an easy thing to add on. But stand up is a big gaping hole in most people's jujitsu, even stand up clinch fighting. Um, but in a self defense, if you're thinking about jujitsu in terms of self defense, you are doing it to get comfortable in the bad positions, comfortable on the ground, with the intent of getting back on your feet. So I
Mhm.
don't want to. Nobody should take jujitsu with a self defense focus and say I'm going to take this guy to the ground, because it's probably the last thing you want to do when you're being attacked. You want to stay on your feet, but the way to stay on your feet is to get comfortable with grappling, right?
Mhm.
So as a means to stay on your feet or to get back to your feet. Jiu-jitsu, again, if you're not comfortable with being on the ground, if you're not used to being swept, if you're not used to popping back up, if you're not used to sprawling, you won't do it in a fight. So jiu-jitsu gives you all those things. But um, yeah, I'm not taking anybody to the ground. If you may fall down, right? You may get taken down, but you generally aren't going to intentionally take somebody to the ground unless unless you know that you're going to have a significant advantage, right? So take that for what it's worth. Like I know that if I throw this guy this certain way, I'm going to land in this position. Maybe he'll hit his head on the ground, or like there's a weapon involved, and your best option is to just like terminal throw, like dump him on the ground and just try to snatch his arm as far away as you can from his body. But staying on the feet, right? But you can't stay on the feet if you don't know how to grapple. So that's where jiu-jitsu comes in.
So with that in mind, would you say that the goal the goal of jiu-jitsu is to take people to the ground and bring the fight there, but the goal of self-defense is not? Is that accurate?
The goal of self-defense is to not get too fucked up, right? To to make the best of a really shitty situation. The best self-defense, and I think you said this earlier, uh, is to not get into the fight, right? Um, so yeah, if you find yourself in a fight, some things have gone terribly wrong because you're not searching for a fight. You're not like going out trying to fight people. Um, Otherwise, it's not self defense, right? You're just looking for a fight. But yeah, so shit has gone very badly, and there is a spectrum, right, of how bad things can get. And if you're on your feet and you're conscious and you're mobile, that's all good. when the fight goes to the ground, you have removed an element of from that, right? So you're moving more towards shitty because now you're not as mobile, right? Now, the more skilled you are on the ground, the less shitty that is. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think uh, the goal of self defense is to win, and the going to the ground part just puts you further away from winning, in my opinion, because a lot of bad shit can happen to you once you're on the ground. Yeah, there's a difference between putting somebody on the ground and taking the fight to the ground.
Right. That's an important
There's a
distinction.
distinction there.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're comfortable there and you're in full control, you're not actually fighting on the ground. You're on top of somebody and you've dominated them,
Yep.
right? But yeah, like guys will think that they're in a bar fight and they're gonna jump on a dude's back and rear naked choke him on the ground. That's cool, you know, it'll look great, but there's a lot of problems with that, right? If the guy has one friend and he decides to kick you in the temple with a steel-toed boot on, you're fucked, you know. So maybe consider don't lay on the ground or just stay on your feet.
Or how about if the guy just, you know, jumps up and falls back and slams you into the ground head first, kind of
Sure,
thing, right?
sure.
So
Right.
if you are
A
going
lot
to
of
go to
bad
the
things can
ground,
happen.
stay on top.
Yeah, and I guess to back up a little bit, the one of the primary things you want to do when you're thinking about, so in jiu-jitsu, right, you're creating opportunities, you're capitalizing on opportunities, you're reacting to your opponent. So it's depending on what happens at any given time. There's kind of like this you can kind of imagine like, okay, I'm in this position, and then these are the possible decisions. These are the possible variables. These are all the things that can happen from here. And then that's constantly shifting throughout that fight, right? Throughout that match or that fight or whatever it is. So that's one of the cool things. It's very at the same time, it's really simple, but it's also extremely complex because depending on what each guy knows who's fighting, things can go in all kinds of different ways. So there's like these big giant decision trees that are kind of shifting all the time when you're doing jujitsu. In a self-defense context, your job is to minimize as many variables as possible through skill or positioning or weapons or whatever. But you want to take away as many variables as possible. And I guess my point is that going to the ground just opens up a new set of variables that you probably don't want to deal with. Yep. Does that clarify it a little bit more?
Yep. So what about striking? Do you have advice for somebody that wants to select a striking school?
Boxing or Muay Thai. Those are the ones, you know. Out of all the striking things, I mean, what else is there? There's karate, there's taekwondo, there's you lose more and more of the elements of it being realistic because they're going to be bound by the rules of whatever it is that they're doing, right? So a lot of taekwondo are going to have rules that are counter to like a real life fight. So there's elements of those arts that remove reality for the sake of following a rule set, right? So you know, I don't know what the rules are in taekwondo. I just know it doesn't look like fighting, and you know, I knew at one time, but I don't really care. But it doesn't look like a real fight, right? You're not the range is kind of is different. The level of the level of control in terms of like being grounded and dealing with somebody who's trying to take you down, it's just not there, right? So and it's the same thing with boxing, but again, with boxing you have a resisting opponent, you're learning useful combinations, you're learning to hit really damn hard really fast. So those are all useful skills, but I think for self-defense you need to have it's absolutely critical that you have the clinch range in your training, because that's where all fights happen. If you can avoid it, if you're a boxer and you can move well and you can avoid getting into a clinch, you'll probably be fine, right? If you're a Thai boxer and you can avoid getting into a clinch, and Thai boxers clinch just fine generally, but there's no training to deal with somebody going low generally, right? So it all depends on how you train, I guess. But if you're serious about self-defense, you need to have the clinch range, meaning like within arm's length, needs to be a significant part of what you do. if self-defense is what you want.
Yeah, that's one thing that struck me when I started training with you, Nick, is that the Greco stuff, the wrestling on the feet is really, really useful. And I could see that being really important in a street fight, in a self-defense situation. And
And
it's a big hole.
let
I
me
mean,
make
I've got a decent clinch in Muay Thai, but against a guy like you that knows Greco, it's you've got a whole skill set that I'm not aware of, you know?
Well, let me make a follow up point to that. You can always a person who has a good clinch can be taught to strike effectively pretty quickly, and can be taught to ground fight effectively pretty quickly. Where when you've got habits built up from striking and from just doing straight jujitsu, it takes a little bit longer to tack those things on, right? Where the clinch serves as kind of like a uh, as a range and a skill set that allows you to build off of very very easily. You can add striking, you can add groundwork, you can add weapons to a clinch. Where if all you've done is striking, you've still got to learn the ground stuff. You still got to learn the clinch. You still got to learn the weapons. If all you've done is jujitsu, you still got to learn the striking. You got to learn everything else after that, right? So the yeah, if I were to kind of summarize everything, you want to be working in the clinch if self defense is what you want.
Yep. Yeah, and one of the benefits of that is for guys that don't know how to fight in the clinch, which is probably most people. Um, it's difficult to be effective at throwing wild, untrained strikes when you're at such a close distance, which is one of the things I
Right.
like about Muay Thai because elbows work great. If I can see your eye, I can throw an elbow at you. I just need a couple of inches. Um, Back to your point about picking a striking art, I would also say that, a couple things. If you are, if the martial art you're looking at has black belts that are 12 years old, that's probably not good. If you can become an expert by 12, there's something missing there, you know. Uh,
Right.
and if you're picking a boxing or a Muay Thai gym, definitely go to one that spars. You've got to spar because you can hit the bag all day long and you can learn how to punch, you can learn how to kick, but that does not mean you know how to fight because
Right.
distance, angle, dodging punches, setting up punches, it's a completely different situation. And I've seen lots and lots of guys that are good on the bag get into their first sparring match, get cracked, turn their back, and just get pummeled. You know,
Right.
so testing striking in a real scenario is important. So if you actually want to learn this stuff and not just learn how to go through the motions, you've got to spar, and sparring means putting yourself at risk. Unfortunately, um,
Right.
if you want to go to a great place where you know the instruction you're getting is quite good in striking, um, choose a school that has a fight team. Choose a school that has a winning fight team. So, for example, I chose Bryce Krause when I lived in Southern California. He's got a school in Costa Mesa called Rising Suns Muay Thai. And that's as close as you're going to get to Thailand. And he's got little kids on his fight team. I don't know how old, 6, 8 years old, all the way up through adults. And these are people that are regular people, not pros, but they're testing themselves in the ring. And the things they learn through the process of learning the skill, applying the skill in the gym, and then applying the skill in the ring, that is an extremely valuable process, both physically and psychologically. So
Right.
if you're young, I would say you want to get into striking, cool. If you're 40 plus and you want to start sparring Muay Thai, if I were you, I'd do Jiu-Jitsu first. I just don't think it's worth the brain
It
damage.
takes longer to acquire the skill
Yeah,
for jujitsu, a lot longer.
for
Even the
striking or
base
Jiu-Jitsu.
level skills for jujitsu, and you can it's it just in my experience, you can take a grappler and teach him to strike. Um, Taking a striker and teaching him to grapple takes longer. It just takes longer because they don't have any idea on the range and there's habits and stuff. But if you're building up from grappling to striking, there's already leverage and just intuitively that people understand leverage and movement and timing. and you can layer on striking fairly. And it won't be as good as somebody who's just striking, right? It won't be as technically, it won't be as pretty. But if you've already got the fighting skill, and I don't, by fighting skill I mean like the base things like positioning and leverage. If you've already got those things ingrained from grappling, it's much easier to layer on striking on top of that. And just another point on just doing striking for self-defense. Look, if you're going to fight somebody who is trying to attack you, what's the likelihood that that guy has been in more fights than you? Even if he doesn't know how to fight,
Yeah.
but he's been there more often than you, way more often than you, right? Because you just started striking in a gym, in air conditioning, wearing comfortable clothes with gloves on, and maybe you've sparred a few times, but that guy's been fighting maybe his whole life.
Yep.
And not just fighting for fun, but for survival, right? So you're way behind, man, and you've got to have such an overwhelming level of proficiency to deal with somebody like that. I mean, like literally a fucking animal. You've got to have such a level of proficiency to deal with that. And good luck getting that in 6 months or a year. It takes a lot of experience.
Yeah, the killer instinct and the aggression and the ability to move forward while feeling pain, those are all X factors, and it'd be a horrible situation to learn about those when you're in the midst of a confrontation.
Yep.
And if you've seen a street fight with people that have those characteristics, you really get the sense of just how extremely different those people are than your average person, and those are dangerous situations. So again, you want to avoid those as often as possible.
Yes, and as soon as you start training in anything, if you're a smart person, you realize how much especially when you take a self-defense focus on things, you start to realize how much you really want to avoid a bad situation. You just don't want any part of it. Like train hard enough in the gym that you don't feel the urge to have to go fight people. That you're just become more calm in nature, and you just don't need that anymore in your life, because it's not good. Shit can go very badly very quickly. Even if you're very good,
Yep.
like even if you're very proficient, you can get fucked up by somebody who's by some dude on the street who's not very good at anything, but just got you that day, right? I'll just say this as so I've been personally involved in situations with people who on paper are very proficient, and even not even just on paper, but like, somebody who's teaching you stuff and you're like, whoa, this dude knows what he's doing. But I've been involved in situations in the real world, right? Outside of the gym, where through a variety of factors, right? Time, like the time of day, the partying before, fatigue, so on and so forth. But somebody is out looking to do a specific thing, looking to get into a fight, and you're out looking to have a good time, right? You're just having a good time, and then ego and posturing and all the male shit comes into play, and you decide you're going to fight these dudes, and all of a sudden, the guy who you think could just maul anybody. And again, maybe they've done this in the ring, maybe they've done this in an MMA cage, just fucking mauled and run through people. And then all of a sudden, the dude's knocked out on the side of the road because he slipped, right, hit his head on the curb, and another dude who shall remain nameless is getting stabbed.
Just hypothetically.
Just hypothetically, yeah. Another dude's getting stabbed, and another dude's running around with a giant gash on his face, right, and just fighting these guys who have no skill at all.
Yeah.
So shit can go pretty bad, and you want to avoid all that kind of stuff. And the deeper you get into it, the more skilled you become. You start attending classes like ECQC, Extreme Close Quarters Concepts, with Shiv worked with Craig Douglas, and even for as long as I've been doing this, I go to that course and I'm like, fuck, I don't want to be involved in anything like this. Like I'm going to do like the first day, the 4 hours the first day is basically how to avoid shitty situations. And then the whole rest of the weekend is like, well, what do you do now that you're in a shitty situation, right? So 2 full days on drawing a gun, shooting from retention, fighting over the gun. But you leave that understanding that first 4 hours on Friday night where you're trying to avoid and you're trying to diffuse and you're trying to talk your way out of shit. That's the most important part of that class,
Yep.
because the people who are good at being um, at dominating other people physically and emotionally uh, are good at doing that, and we're not good at doing that. Like, we're normal people, right? We're not used to imposing our will through violence and intimidation on somebody. And somebody who is good at that is going to wait until the opportunity presents itself, and they're going to create that opportunity. They'll lower your guard, they'll confuse you, they'll whatever happens. But you don't want to be in the middle of it before you realize that I'm in the middle of a bad thing right now.
Yep.
Right? So
Yep. Let's talk about the point you made about ego. Some of the calmest, least confrontational people I know are the most skilled. And I think that's the exact reason that you outlined. Um, it's a shame in our society that combat and combat training is not more common, because I think it's really important. I think it's really important, especially for men, for both sexes. But I can speak as a man, with the ego and all the bullshit that comes along with being a guy. If you get that out in the gym, your chances of getting into a nasty situation out in the real world are so much lower. And so I would say, if you're under 30, or if you have kids, this is something you want to think about. If you can expose young people to the reality of violence and the reality of physical confrontation, that's a very good level set and ego check, firstly. Secondly, it's a great way to get out aggressive energy. So just the
right.
willingness and desire to do that stuff in the first place is gone. And then lastly, it's fun. Like, when I'm rolling with my
Yeah.
buddies, we're like, you know, dogs at the park, running around playing games. It's we're just having a great time being physical, and starting strength is all about having an improved physical existence. And if you get big and strong, you can use that in a bunch of awesome ways. And every time I get a chance to roll with Nick, I do, because it's a hell of a good time and I learned something new. It's one of my favorite things to do. I very much enjoy the physical aspect of martial arts. So for those reasons, I think it's worth looking at this stuff.
Yeah, you strip away a lot of the bullshit in your in the way you think about yourself and the way you think about other people when you're constantly testing yourself against another person. And it's something that we don't experience in our lives at all. For some people, never. Right? They never put themselves under that kind of pressure, under that kind of under those kinds of conditions where you have to humble yourself and realize that you suck at something, and there's a small potential for injury, and it's a little bit scary, and so on. Right? So I say this. I kind of said this a few times in different talks. Like, I just talked to John Valentine, who's going to be helping with the lift shoot fight camp. So he's going to be doing the pistol stuff and a lot of the combative stuff. But look, violence is in our DNA. From the beginnings of humanity, violence has been a part of the deal. So I really think that everybody needs to have a relationship with violence, even if it's in a controlled, uh, especially if you can do it in a controlled environment, right? Like in a jiu-jitsu gym, under control, learning skill, burning up some physical energy, and also testing yourself against an opponent. There's going to be situations. There's going to be times, even in the best of jiu-jitsu schools, where you're going to have to roll with somebody and be like, "Fuck, I really don't want to roll with this guy today," right? Or ever, right? And then you just do it, and then it's fine. But uh, there's few opportunities in today's world where you can put yourself up against that kind of quote unquote adversity, right? Where you can have a situation that you maybe are unsure about, you're not really wanting to do, but you force yourself to do it, and you've done it, and it's great, right? So the ego check, the just the tapping into our innate uh, capability for violence is important, because I think the more you suppress that, and the more people get away from like their physical existence and just thinking that their feelings and what they think and intellectually what's going on is the most important thing, you lose the grounding. And a lot of the people that are the most full of shit are the ones that are the least physical. It's strong in terms of fighting capability. All this stuff that we consider to be um, physical attributes. Uh, the most full of shit people are the ones that are furthest away from that.
What
That's just my
percentage
opinion, right? But
what percentage of men would you estimate are overconfident about their ability to defend themselves if a situation popped up?
100%,
I agree.
100%, every single one,
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
every single one.
Yep.
That's why it's important to go to something where you actually, like if you're serious, if you're serious about this, you've got to put yourself in situations where you might lose, and there's a safe way to do that, right? You can go to a class, like you can go to a Shivworks class and work with simunitions, and you can have somebody there who doesn't want to get shot, and you also don't want to get shot, and you both have a gun, and then Craig says, "Ready, go." And then who wins, right? And sometimes you win, a lot of times you lose, but either way, you learn a ton from that. And you don't want that kind of thing to happen for the first time in a real life situation if
With
you can
live
avoid it,
rounds. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Speaking of weapons, let's end the conversation there. When do you recommend, if someone's interested in learning weapons for self-defense, at what point in their progression do you recommend they start learning weapons? What weapons do you recommend for someone to learn, and how do you suggest they go about doing that?
What do you mean by just weapons in general?
Yeah, so which let's start with which weapons. So if someone's going to get into weapons, which do you recommend learning first?
Well, you learn how to fight, and then the weapons are tools that you add on, right? So I don't want to. I don't want to. And look, this is there's martial arts, right? There's like Filipino martial arts that focus on knives, and it's kind of the opposite approach. It's like here's the knife, and they'll disagree, right? They'll say that this isn't actually what they do, but like here's a tool, and here's a system around using that specific tool, and here's a stick, and here's a system for using that stick. Um, if you look at it from a fundamental perspective, you need to learn how to fight. You need to learn how to grapple. You need to learn how to clinch fight, and then you layer on things on top of that. So, um, somebody who can fight, if they're proficient, if they can hit, if they can clinch, they can grapple. You should be able to put a stick or a knife or a screwdriver or a piece of wood or a magazine in their hands, and they should be able to be effective, right? Now there's skill that you can layer on top of that to make it more efficient and more effective, right? So if if you have, let's say, a knife, and you are a good grappler, and you add some kind of knife skills on top of that, obviously that's a better thing. But it's it's better to get the fighting skill first and then add the weapons, add the tools on top of that. So back to kind of a thing I said earlier, it's easier to teach somebody how to fight with a knife who knows how to fight, who knows how to grapple, who knows how to punch. Where somebody who knows how to use a knife, like there's an awesome video running around the internet right now. This dude at like a knife counter at a store, and the guy hands him a knife, and then he does this like shit. He's like this thing, and it looks super awesome, but that doesn't look like a fight. That doesn't look like a fight, and people spend years and years and years doing these movements, these kind of choreographed dueling movements, and that's great. But what's the context? Like, how do you plug that into an actual fight? When did the knife come out? When did you realize you needed a knife? Like, why do you have a knife out in the first place, right? So all these things need to be in place first. So there's some decision making, there's some clinch work that went into that, there's some striking, there's some movement, maybe even before the knife ever came out. So does that make sense? So you got to know how to fight first, and then the weapons. Um, so which weapons? Look, a knife is a blade, and it doesn't miss. It doesn't misfire. It doesn't double feed. It doesn't. It always works, right? Even if it's dull, it's gonna create some damage. So that's not. I mean, and people will disagree with this, but it's not like a super high skill thing. You should carry a knife. You should carry a knife for opening Amazon boxes, and you should carry a separate knife for self-defense purposes if that's what you want to do. Um, so knives are cool as hell, right? But when you start talking about like a gun, a pistol, or a rifle, now you've got a whole other skill set that you've got to learn and get proficient at. So if carrying a gun is one of the things that you're going to layer onto your fighting, you've got to start doing it now, and you've got to get really good at it. You've got to get good at shooting. You've got to be comfortable with the gun, and then at some point you've got to integrate the two things: the fighting with the skill with the gun, um, because in reality, how uh, drawing a gun from a concealment or from a bag and pulling it out and shooting somebody is one thing. And that's like, yeah, okay, those are some, I don't want to say they're basic skills, but that's kind of essentially what you're training for, right? You're drawing a gun, you're shooting it. But think about that versus you're in a situation where somebody comes up to you, and during the course of an encounter with another human being who may be trying to confuse you, deceive you, or just hurt you, at some point a gun gets into the fight. How did the gun come? How did the gun get into the fight? You had to draw the gun. They had to draw a gun. Uh, and how does that happen? Because it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen where like it's a race. Because as soon as you start going for a gun, if the other guy knows what's up and he goes for your gun, if he doesn't go for your gun and you pull it out and you shoot the guy, okay, that's great. But what if now you're fighting over a gun, right? He recognizes there's a gun and he grabs it. It's not, it's not the movies where you can just shoot somebody. Guns, as soon as hands get on guns, they're gonna fail. They're gonna jam. They're gonna double feed. The magazine's gonna pop out. On top of the possibility of you getting your gun taken away and used against you, right? So you see what I'm saying? It gets super like complicated and in depth. But back to my original point, if you know how to fight, it's easier to layer these things on top of that than the other direction, which is I have a gun, I'm safe, I'm good, and then a moment comes in your life where you need to draw the gun under stress, under pressure, in the middle of a fight, and you don't have the skills to be able to do that.
Got it. How do you
Now,
choose a good?
it's super unlikely that.
Go ahead.
Let me just make this one point, because I realize it's super unlikely that that'll ever happen to me or you or anybody watching this. Very, very unlikely, right? The possibilities are very low. But if you're thinking about self-defense, why not do something that matters? Like, why not train to proficiency on these complicated and dangerous situations? Because then everything else becomes easier, right? Because people will dismiss this and say, well, that'll never happen, but okay, none of this could ever happen to you. That's cool. That's fine. But if you're choosing to train for self-defense, make it effective.
Got it. And how do you recommend people select a shooting instructor?
It's a good question.
I don't know the answer to it, by the way, because I've had several, and I've had basically every different one teach me stuff in different
same.
ways, and
Right.
it's hard for me to, as someone that doesn't know what he doesn't know, it's hard to know what's more correct or less correct, more effective, less effective.
Yeah, honestly, at the beginning, if you're just starting out, it doesn't matter too much. Like it would be better if you could find somebody good. Word of mouth, is great. So there are so many training classes available by really highly qualified people. And by qualified, I don't mean like they were, operator in X unit, and then did this and this and this. I mean, like good teachers, good coaches. So there's a lot of those people around. So word of mouth. But if you've just bought your first gun, just go take a class. It doesn't matter what it is. They may teach some shitty stuff, whatever, but you're getting some instruction, you're getting familiar with the gun. And then as you get better, do your own reading and watch videos and see who you like and see if you can get into a class with them. So just off the top of my head, like if if I'm looking for a shooting a class to go to, anybody who's associated with Modern Samurai Project, I'm going to pay them to go do a class with them. Um, my coach, who like I'm his worst client ever because I hardly ever I don't regularly do my workouts, but my shooting coach is Ian Strimbeck. Rune Nation is his company, so he does remote coaching. He's great. His classes are really really good.
And this is like online coaching for strength training, just for people that aren't familiar. So you're doing dry
Same thing.
fire,
Yeah,
you're recording yourself, you're
right,
recording yourself at the range, right?
right. Yep. Uh, Green Ops is another company that's out there. Fieldcraft Survival is another company that's out there. And so when I look at a class I want to go to that I'm going to pay money for, I'm generally searching out people who do all of this stuff that I'm interested in. Right. So they're integrating fighting with pistol work. I'm not super excited about guys who are just and not to minimize anybody, right? But like a big name who's very popular. I don't really care about that. I really want to have a good coach who understands fighting. Like if they've been doing jujitsu for a long time, if they've been involved in self defense for a long time, and they teach a great pistol class, that's who I want to go to. So just off the top of my head, that's who people I'm thinking about.
While we're talking, I've been noticing a theme here, which is whatever physical endeavor you pursue, definitely get a coach. Whether you're trying to get stronger, you're trying to learn how to grapple, wrestle, strike, shoot, it's way easier and your progression is much, much faster if you have a pro who's done it before and has taught other people how to do it before, guiding you along the way. Um, so we can wrap up here, Nick, unless there's anything else you want to add.
Um, no, look, it's really easy to like we've covered a lot of topics and a lot of ground here. And it's just like people who want to start doing strength training. Um, just start, man. Just find somebody and just get started. You'll figure it out along the way. Nothing terrible will happen if you don't have the absolute best instructor, if you don't have the absolute best coach for any of these things. So just get started, get into it, and then as you get some experience and you want to go deeper, you want to find better instruction, better resources, better information. Um, that happens as a result of the process. Don't wait to get started on something like this, on self defense, on fighting, on boxing, on jujitsu, on learning how to use a pistol. Uh, don't wait for the exact perfect opportunity. Just start. And then honestly, most people give it up. That most people quit. If there's 100 people that start boxing or start jujitsu, there'll be 3 who continue for 2 years. So just start and see if it's something you like, see if it's something you're into, and then start asking questions and start finding better resources, and then your journey or whatever will morph, and you'll build up some good training over the years. But you could spend the next 3 months researching and thinking about things and trying to find exactly the right perfect information and making sure you're going to the exact same guy, where you could have just spent 3 months training, even if it's not the best training in the world, but you're gaining some experience, right? So um, these are all things that take a very long time to get good at. And uh, the better you are at them, the more you realize that there's even more levels, and it's even more difficult than you thought it was. So don't wait. 3 months of hesitating to start jujitsu is 3 months wasted.
Mm-hmm.
And it applies to any of this stuff.
Yep. And I would also add that if you do decide to learn something, be focused. Try to learn one thing at a time. And if you're going to do it once a week or less, you're not going to make much progress. I think for most of this stuff, let me know if you disagree, Nick, but I can definitely speak to striking. I can speak to shooting. I can speak to strength training and grappling. So 3+ days a week if you want to get proficient. If you want to learn something one day, not have forgotten it by the time your next session comes around, and build upon that learning, you've got to do it pretty regularly.
Yeah, regularly is the key. So yeah, one time a week is not the best. 2 times seems to be the sweet spot if you're going to do something for a very long time, right? So the guys who come in and they start training and they go 5 days a week, most of the time they're going to burn out and they're not going to be around for much longer. So the point is there's got to be a balance, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if the more days that you can train, the better. But don't go so hard into something that it ruins the rest of your life, and then you have to make a decision of whether you can keep doing this thing or you're gonna like live a more reasonable life, right? So anything that you do, try to integrate it into your life in a way that makes sense. But yeah, I think in general, two times a week, you can get away with like if you can dry fire once a week, that's fine. Get to the range once a month or so, dry fire once a week. Um, that's kind of minimums there. But again, dry firing is something that you can do literally every day very easily. Something like going to a gym and doing jujitsu. If you can go 3 times a week, you're going to make some serious progress. If you can go 4, obviously you're going to make way more progress. Just because you can't fake the mat time, you can't fake the experience. You have to get the experience. So for most people, your strength training, you're doing a bunch of stuff 2-3 times a week. 2 is should be your target. If you can go more, do it. But again, integrate it in your life.
Yep. Yep. Really good stuff, Nick. That was really good information. Thanks for sharing. I want to share
Thank you,
the dates for your lift shoot fight
man.
event one more time. So if you're watching this before April 30th, April 30th, 2022, Nick is hosting an event at the Wichita Falls Athletic Club in Texas. April 30th to May 1st, lift shoot fight. Sign up link is on startingstrength.com. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, and it'll be. Yep. One more quick thing. It'll be Rip, me, and John Valentine is the other instructor. So look at the listing on our website for the information on that. Hope to see you guys there.
All right. Thanks again.